So when I first understood the huge plight that faces orphans globally, God put this desire deep in my heart to adopt. And so when my husband and I were dating and I explained to him my commitment to adoption, he got on board. He loved it. It was only recently that he admitted to me all that excitement was because he thought I was cute. I know. And that in reality, he figured we'll pop out some biological kids and then maybe one day we might talk about adoption. And that's kind of the path we started down. About a year into marriage, I found out I was pregnant and we celebrated that little flicker of a heartbeat on the ultrasound monitor. But very soon after, I experienced my first miscarriage. And then 10 months later, we were excited to be pregnant again, but I was nervous. And we waited till the end of the first trimester to really celebrate or tell our friends. But then days into my second trimester, our second pregnancy loss. And I know this is not a path that I walk alone. So many of you have experienced that pain and that loss. And for me, the grief, the waiting through that, it was incredibly heart-wrenching. And so we went from this place of loss straight into a new monthly ritual where I became a complete nervous wreck each month as I waited for that little plastic destiny stick that they call a pregnancy test to tell me my entire future. But month after month after month, nothing. So eventually we did all the medical testing only to find out there was nothing wrong. Yet for years, I kept not getting pregnant. And for us, waiting to become parents, it had become devastating. It was infuriating. It was becoming a wedge in our marriage. And for me, it honestly was just an unrelenting obsession. All I wanted in my whole life was to become a mother. So then we decided we don't have to wait anymore. It's finally time to adopt. So I threw all my energy into filling out the mountain of paperwork. We had a social worker come in. She got into every crevice of our lives. And then we were approved. We could adopt anywhere in the United States. But of course then, we waited again. But this waiting was different. This time, we waited for an adoption agency to call us. We waited for a birth mother to review our profile. It's like a scrapbook of our lives, and decide if she wanted to entrust us to raise her child as our own. And this kind of waiting was incredibly nerve-wracking because we were just bystanders. We felt so powerless because someone we had never met had full control over our lives. And to be clear, birth parents have 100% all the rights to make full decisions for their children. It was just that for us, sitting at home, waiting to decide, will we be parents soon or will we not? It was like a new form of torture, is what it felt like. But don't worry, because eventually the call did come. And we were so excited. We were matched with a birth mother in St. Louis. She was due in just a few weeks. And y'all, her name was Angel. I mean, it seems perfect. And so a month later, she went into labor. We threw all things baby in the car and we headed north. On the way there, we were driving through the night. So she agreed she would call the adoption agency in the morning to let us know what time to come to the hospital. That morning, though, she didn't call. I was stressing. But they reminded me, Lisa, she just gave birth. She's trusting you with her child. Give her time, let her rest and grieve. And so we did. We settled in, we had a little place we were staying there in Missouri for a couple of weeks while we waited for all the paperwork to go through. So we waited there and she didn't call. Not in the afternoon or the evening. The agency's calling her now. She's not returning phone calls, and late into the night. And all of us, we know that feeling where there's nothing left to do but wait. And while you probably haven't waited to adopt a baby in St. Louis in an extended stay apartment, right? You've waited for the big, important, life-changing things. You've waited to find a job or a mate. You've waited for financial stability. You've waited to graduate, to see if you will ever get the promotion. Some of you are just like us. You're waiting to find out if you'll have kids Some of you are wondering if your kids, who are now grown, will ever move out of your house, right? Some of you have the hard weights of waiting for a diagnosis. So much of our time, our life, is spent waiting. And in all this waiting, it becomes so difficult to make decisions, to feel settled, to really have any sense of contentment, because we simply aren't where we want to be. The waiting can be paralyzing. It can leave us without joy or peace. It can consume us. It has most certainly consumed me. There's a Harvard business professor, David Maistier, and he actually studied the psychology of waiting in lines. While it's a different kind of waiting, his findings ring very true, because what he found is all this anxiety we experience while we wait, it isn't actually just the time we spent waiting, but our perception and our experience while we wait. So a few of his findings. Uncertain waits feel longer than known finite waits. This is why when you go to Disney World, they post the wait times, right? So you know exactly how long you have to wait. Unoccupied time feels longer than occupied time. Interestingly, this is why there are mirrors in all of our elevators. It's to occupy us. Who knew? Unexplained waits are longer than explained waits. It's why we're more patient with the pizza guy when he's really late, because if there's a huge thunderstorm outside, right? We understand why he's late. And these things make sense to us because in reality, the worst waits, the most painful waits of our lives, they're mostly uncertain, unoccupied, and unexplained. They are filled with anxiety. And that's what was killing me about becoming a mother. The waiting was the hardest part. I really thought that waiting was going to be the end of me. And I think whether you're like us and you were following Jesus for a long time, or for some of you, you don't even know what you think about all of this faith stuff. Regardless, in our times of waiting, we ask some of the same questions. Why is this happening? Why do I have to wait? We started to wonder, what could God be up to in all of this? And I'm glad we're not the first to ask these really big questions. King David, he's the same David as David and Goliath. When he grew up, he became the ruler of Israel, and he was known as a man after God's own heart. And in Psalm 13, 1 and 2, here's what he said. "O Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever. How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul and with sorrow in my heart every day?" David, I feel you. God, how long? It feels that way, right? And when we're in these times of intense waiting, God can feel completely silent. Yet a few verses later, David says this, "But I trust in your unfailing love. I will rejoice because you have rescued me. I will sing to the Lord because he is good to me." And it doesn't appear in between these two statements that anything changed in David's life. It's just that David wrote what he knew to be true, that even when God feels very far away in the waiting, his unfailing love is near. He is a rescuer. We can praise him. He is good. David knew that just because God seems silent does not mean he's absent. Just because he seems silent does not mean he is absent. He has not left us in these in-between times. He has not left you. He is here. And he wants to satisfy the longing of our hearts, not just by changing our circumstances, but by changing us in the midst of those circumstances. And this begins to happen when we change our focus from seeking God's gifts to instead seeking the giver of those gifts, Jesus. And the shift happens in us when we begin to do what God calls us to do in all circumstances, to love him, to love others, to pray, to be thankful, to trust him. And as we do these things, we start to experience the fruit of God's Spirit. He offers us peace and patience, forgiveness. We experience long suffering, right? The very gifts that we need to wait well, he gives us. And Maesters' research, it showed us it's not how long we wait that causes all the problems, right? It's our experience and our perception while we wait. And seeking God, connecting with him, it changes that experience. And we discover that waiting doesn't have to be wasted time. Instead, it can be transformative time. So you might be wondering how our story of waiting ended. And that night, late at night, in that dingy little apartment, we got some of the worst news. Really, by getting no news. She just never called. To this day, we've never heard from her again. And we had invested so much in being there in that moment. It was just gone. And it was one of the saddest nights of my entire life. But yet, I get what King David was saying. I want to share with you something I wrote just a couple days after we left St. Louis. God says he will give us peace, even when everything in our life is chaos. God promises hope, joy, patience, kindness, gentleness, and rescue from the most dire of circumstances. He never promises to change the crappy stuff that happens to us. He has yet to eradicate pain from our lives. But Scripture is adamant that while the world may be a hot mess, Christ is our refuge and our Savior. Simply knowing that the God of the universe deeply cares for us grows our faith. As we turn our attention to him, we are more certain than ever that Christ is enough. Loving God and being loved by him is the greatest relationship I've ever known. And in the end, baby or no baby, I know it will be enough to see us through. That's what God has for us in the waiting. It was a lesson I could not have learned any other way. That whatever's happening to us and around us, God is working in us to transform us so that we can live a truly abundant life. Just because God seems silent does not mean he's absent. Now, I am very happy to tell you that in a miraculous turn of events, just days later, we got a phone call, and within 24 hours, we were matched with a birth mother, we traveled to Utah, and we met our firstborn son, Barrett Lance CRIDER. And it was absolutely glorious. I know, he's so cute. It was such a great day. But I'm not naive. I know that so many stories of waiting, they don't have a happy ending. In our own story, there's been more miscarriages. Our family today is messy and complicated. But we are more certain than ever that as we wait, that God is working something good in us.